He's long argued against using education to enforce a political agenda. In an article this week that he wrote, Dr. Donnelly said the cultural left has long targeted children's stories and fairy tales to enforce its politically correct agenda-based theories on identity politics, victimhood, neo-Marxism, and feminist gender and queer theories. Dr. Kevin Donnelly has just written a bestseller book titled How Political Correctness is Destroying Australia, and he joins me now from our Melbourne studios. Welcome to the show, Kevin. Great to have you here. We're now out into regional Australia, and I think you'll find a lot of supporters for your common sense, plain-speaking view amongst the communities that I grew up in and I have still many friends and families in. Your book's in its third print run, which is extraordinary. Tell us the main sort of guts of your thesis about how much damage political correctness is doing to Australia.
Well, Peter, as you know, it's an issue that's been there for 20, 30 years. Tony Abbott talked about it when he was Prime Minister. John Howard talked about the battle of ideas, and he went head-to-head with Paul Keating a number of times about our history, especially our relationship to the United Kingdom. It's an issue which really a lot of people now are getting concerned about, very worried about. It's very difficult, whether you're at work, around the barbecue, around the dinner table. People now are really worried about what they say, what they talk about. You can lose your job, you can be vilified on social networking sites. Political correctness, pushed by what I call the cultural left, and we see that in schools every day. It's an issue that we really have to address and remedy, and I hope the new Prime Minister, and I think he is aware of this, will take a leading step to confront it.
Let's use the example of the article you wrote, the column you wrote this week about children's stories and fairy tales. You've, as I said, have had a long, distinguished career as an education expert. You've been part of curriculum reviews. Tell me what the problem is with something as innocent as a fairy tale or child story.
Well, as you mentioned, the impact of theory, whether it's gender or queer theory or radical feminism or transgender, the impact of theory has been there for many years. I taught English, loved literature, taught it for 18 years, but when I was a member of the Australian Association of Teachers for English, I had to resign because I was so appalled about what they were arguing at conferences. They argued, for example, that Cinderella should not be taught because it privileged what they called heteronormativity. What they meant was that the happy ending was when the princess and prince got married. So something like Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare's famous play, again they argued it privileged love between a man and a woman. I mean, I could go on with lots of examples. I wrote an article in the Australian this week. My favourite was the Three Little Pigs.
Oh, look, he's Jesus.
Three houses.
Look at the halo.
Safeguard themselves from
He's telling the truth.
And the strongest house was made of brick in New South Wales some years ago. The curriculum advisor there from the Education Department argued that Three Little Pigs was offensive to Aborigines,
especially Muslims.
White, Eurocentric, patriarchal, capitalist buildings with bricks, and it had to be.
And that's racist because it keeps it out.
Theory.
Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people at home.
Political correctness for you.
Laughing along with this sort of story, Kevin, but the reality is this is fair income you're not making. These are the people that have great input into the curriculum in schools, what our children are taught.
And workplaces.
This is where it's the most damaging. This is not just a joke, this is real.
It is, and many years ago now I did my postgraduate work, and Bob Santa Maria, as you know, fought long and hard against socialism. He argued, and I was fortunate enough to meet him a number of times, he argued that you have to know your enemy. So when I did the postgrad work, I looked at what socialism, communism was doing in terms of education, and there was a writer, Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist. He argued for the long march through the institutions. So during the 60s and 70s, the cultural left decided that the way to win the battle wasn't at the barricades. It was to take the long march, to take over education, universities, schools, the media, politics, the church, family, and they've been very successful. When I reviewed the national curriculum, I was astounded that across all the subjects, students had to learn about Aboriginal history, culture, spirituality, and that's fine. But at the same time, they learnt nothing, almost nothing, about Western civilization, our Judeo-Christian
Actually, I did.
epochal events like the Renaissance, the Reformation. So we're actually denying our young people an understanding and a knowledge of what it is about our civilization that we should defend. And really, it's a great shame because we're having generations of young people growing up without knowing the difference between communism and democracy.
There's also the issue, isn't there, Kevin, that under Julia Gillard's time as Prime Minister, the Sustainable Development Goals out of the United Nations were built into the high school curriculum, primary school as well, and students in subjects like maths have to do climate change issues with their maths problems, not just in the science area or in the geography area, but it goes right across or permeates the entire curriculum. Now, I can't remember this ever being debated much at the time. They were slipped in by Julia Gillard and have only been really picked up subsequently. This is an issue right across the board with, I guess, intellectual independence for academics, both at school level, at teacher level, curriculum people that draft the curriculum, but also in our universities.
It's a real issue and a great concern to me. I've been involved for over 20, 30 years now. And what's happening is that the left, the Long March, they've been so successful that the national curriculum, you mentioned that, has really been imbued with this cultural left idea about sustainability, about Indigenous, and there's no balance there. I mean, it gets worse because I only found out last week that they're reviewing the national curriculum, the CARA.
Here comes Jesus again.
Even though it's only just been fully implemented, they're reviewing the national curriculum. But what they are intending is to transform it in terms of what the OECD calls Education 2030. So we're actually going to have what's happening in schools now in terms of the curriculum imposed by the OECD from overseas, and it's all about so-called sustainability, 21st century learning, collaborative negotiated goal setting, all of these fads that are calculated, I'd argue, to dumb down the curriculum. So if I was a new minister, I'd actually be looking at what ACARA is doing, because the reality is we don't need all of this. What we should be doing is having a far more rigorous academic curriculum where we give all children a balanced and comprehensive knowledge and understanding of subjects like music, history, literature, art, without all this indoctrination.
We just saw from the recent NAPLAN tests, Kevin, that we've got a fifth of Australian children that are so far beyond the pale when it comes to literacy and numeracy. We've been importing so many of these ideas from overseas, from UN-type bodies, from the OECD, from so-called global experts. That over the last 15 to 20 years has made us a poorer educational nation, not a richer educational nation. When are parents going to rear up? Because it's clear that the politicians, I have to say, even on both sides, appear captured by this ideology. And even if governments of the centre-right come in and turn things upside down, the left and all the embedded personnel all the way through the system tend to reorientate it back to the left. In the end, parents have got the greatest power. When are parents going to speak up about their concerns?
Well, increasingly, parents are talking, and whether it's around the barbecue or around the dinner table or when they're out shopping.
What about when they're at school?
There's been an increase, especially in Queensland, but also New South Wales, in homeschooling, because parents are getting genuinely worried about the fact that their children are being indoctrinated. Whether it's Safe Schools, a gender program, the Prime Minister talked about this only this week. So parents are concerned. Over 25% of Australian children go to independent and Catholic schools, and one reason that is there's such an upsurge in enrolments is because parents are worried about whether schools in fact are reflecting the values that they have at home. And I'll finish by saying it's not about money. I mean, the ALP member federally, Andrew Lee's argued for years, it's not about money. It's about having a rigorous curriculum. It's about having motivated teachers who aren't drowned in bureaucracy and red tape. And it's having greater autonomy and diversity rather than all roads lead to Canberra.
Look, beyond the education issue, in your book, Political Correctness, you tackle the very thorny word of multiculturalism. Now, I'm obviously from an immigrant family. I'm not Indigenous. I think most Australians want to see us remain an immigrant nation, but it's the rate of immigration that gets under people's skin, particularly the high rate we run at now, but also this culture of multiculturalism where we're all cultures in every culture, but no one Australia culture anymore that's allowed to knit us all together. We used to celebrate that and celebrate the flag and celebrate things like Australia Day, and they're all very much under threat. What's your issue with the term multiculturalism?
Crocodile Dundee sold us out.
Pierre Rickman, you might know, was an academic at the ANU, one of Australia's most famous academics. He argued many years ago that multiculturalism was a contradiction in terms. You can't actually celebrate different cultures unless, as you said, you have something holding it all together, something that gives a bond, cements it. Now, I'd argue in the book that that's our Western cultural heritage, whether it's common law, Magna Carta, our Westminster system, the New Testament, the whole idea, in fact, that we are all created with inherent dignity, that we should be treated fairly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of that is quite culturally specific in the sense that it's come from Western culture. So multiculturalism really is dangerous because what it ends up, as Geoffrey Blaney, our most famous historian, said some years ago, is a nation of tribes. And Douglas Murray from Europe, UK, he only recently toured Australia, and I met him in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and he said to me, Kevin, don't let Australia go down the same road as the UK and Europe, because they now have ghettos in Nice, Paris, wherever it might be, London.
Paris is fucked.
Because they've had unrestricted immigration, and they've allowed these ghettos to pop up everywhere, because they've forgotten the fact, as David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, said, you need to acknowledge and celebrate the values, beliefs, institutions that hold it together and that ensure our peace and stability.
Couldn't agree more with you, Kevin. Don, I have to say, whenever I was in Britain or in Europe with a former Prime Minister or another politician, people often said the same thing to us, that we, Australia, were to them the great hope of a country that still could avoid their mistakes. You speak a lot of sense. I'm going to put details about where people can get a copy of your book. Political Correctness is Destroying Australia on my Facebook site.
We sold our culture out when we signed up with the UN.
Say, if I can interrupt, Peter, a second book is coming out in about 4 weeks, How Political Correctness is Destroying Education. So we'll have to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. I'll put all the details up on my Facebook page. Thanks very much, Kevin.
My pleasure.
Coming up after the break, my panel with the Australians Adam Crichton